Hello, I'm Mr. Scally. I'm a chemistry teacher here at Edgemont Junior Senior High School.
During the Challenger explosion in 1986, how old were you when the Challenger explosion happened?
17, I think it was.
Okay, so you were in high school.
I was, yeah.
Were you like in school?
Yeah, we were in school at the time watching it on TV in gym class.
Oh, how did did they put it on like a big TV screen?
Well, you didn't really have big TVs back then.
Right.
You kind of had like a cart that had the TV up at the top, probably about this big or so. But after that happened, they wheeled it out of the office, the athletic office, and put on the news that it had exploded. I mean, we weren't just watching it when it happened, because there had already been like dozens of space shuttle flights, you know, prior to that. So it wasn't really something that was a special thing, you know. I mean, about the only special thing about it, I guess, was that they had a civilian on board, teacher actually, Krista McAuliffe, and that was kind of why that one was, you know, widely hyped before the flight. And then, but even that didn't necessarily mean that, you know, gym class was going to stop and you're going to watch like the space shuttle go off for the 20th time or whatever that is. And then, but once it had happened, and I don't remember what time of day it was. I think it was winter though, because we were inside for gym, so it was probably winter. But they did wheel it out and let you see what was going on the TV. You know?
Do you think it had an impact on your life?
Not really. I don't think it really affected anything, to be honest with you. I think maybe for me personally, I thought it was interesting because there's a guy, I think that was the one where Richard Feynman, the physicist, came out within about 24 hours and had explained what had happened. And in that case, I already was kind of looking to become an engineering student at that point in time. And so maybe it solidified that decision to some degree, but but that was pretty much it. But I had already read, I think, Feynman's book. He had a thing, Surely You Must Be Joking, Mr. Feynman, which I think is probably in the shelf over there someplace right now.
Do you think, because right before the Challenger explosion, there was the Apollo 1 fire in 1967? I mean...
Oh, the one with Gus Grissom?
Yeah.
The Apollo 1?
Yeah.
Is that the one you saw? Yeah, that was terrible. Virgil Grissom and Chafee, and I can't remember the third guy, were incinerated on the platform, and that was just a test, yeah.
Do you think this affected the reputation or public opinion of NASA?
I think there was a lot. After that was the first time that you really saw people question why it was that we were just going up in the space shuttle,
Right.
Going around the Earth, 36 times and then coming back a couple of days later and landing. It didn't really seem to make, initially the space shuttle seemed like a cool thing. When you thought it was like a transition from one-use space vehicles to something that could be reused over and over.
Right.
But I think that because I was big into this NASA when I was little, because of the Apollo missions when I was younger. My father actually was in the shipping industry, and who was it from Apollo 13? James Lovell, after he had left NASA, was affiliated with a tugboat company in the Gulf of Mexico. And so my father had done business with James Lovell.
Oh, wow.
So for pretty much my whole life, I was interested in the space missions. But the thought was that the space shuttle would kind of be a transition to, once again going to the moon or Mars or something like that, but now doing it in a reusable vehicle. And that never seemed to happen. It was just like one after another going up into space. And,
Right.
it was kind of after a while, it just got to be, what are we doing with this? I mean, there was even a guy that I worked for. His son was an astronaut for NASA, Ronnie Garan Jr., from Yonkers, New York, who was, you know, on a space shuttle. You're like, everybody and their mother's on a space shuttle here. What are we gonna do with this? You know?
Yeah, what's going
Yeah.
on?
After a while, you're just like, where are we going with this? You know?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. And now moving on to the Bush and Gore presidential election. How old were you when the presidential election happened?
So Bush and Gore, that would be the 2000 election. How old was I then? I don't really know. I guess I was 25 years younger than I am now.
So you're old enough to vote.
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah. By a long shot, yeah. So I had voted and whatnot, yeah. Yeah, no, it was just a, you know, closely contested election that came down to, you know, I think it was Miami-Dade County in Florida,
Yeah.
where there was,
Like
it was only 300 vote difference or something like that. And so they wound up going and doing a recount, and then there was debates because there were paper ballots and they had to punch out the name that you wanted to vote for,
Like
whether they were hanging chads
Yes.
or not, and
Pregnant
you know,
chads.
and then went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court essentially ruled in George Bush's favor for it, you know. But you know, it just kept going kind of on and on for a number of days there, and it had to sort of end at that point in time.
Yeah. So did you feel like the manual recounts was like kind of unnecessary? Or
What's that?
The manual recounts. Okay.
No, I think they had to do the recount, but I think that it sort of degenerated into like, you know, is this a vote or is this not a vote? And
Right.
you know, I mean, the good thing that came out of it is like you look at Florida now. Florida now is like a paragon of voting. I mean, they really have cleaned up their act, as opposed to like California, that 60 days after the last presidential
Right.
election is still counting votes. You know, Florida has their votes totally counted by that evening. They're counting mail-in ballots as they're received and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think they learned their lesson as to how to go about doing this.
And then in 1982, the Bosnian ethnic cleansing that happened in Bosnia with the Bosnian nation.
Yeah, and the Serbs and the Croats and, you know, the Bosnian Muslims and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of remember that because, and I think a lot of people were focused on it because prior to that, I don't know which Olympics it was it 88? The Winter Olympics was in Sarajevo.
Oh.
And, you know, there's actually a really nice, well documented Olympics, you know. You got to see a lot of the stuff that was there, and they had all, you know, as they always do on the Olympics, they have like things about the country, the host country, and sort of like you know, I don't remember what year the Olympics were, but very shortly after that, what you found is that there was this terrible, like, I wouldn't say civil war, but this terrible division that led to bloodshed within Bosnia. And I guess, you know, one of the things that you realize then is it's not like a coincidence that happened after, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
You know, Yugoslavia prior to that, nobody had ever heard of Bosnia or Serbia, or Montenegro or Croatia in, you know, 1987. What is that? The only time you heard of Serbia was, you know, as the beginning of World War I, you know,
Right, yeah.
where Serbian nationalists had killed Franz Joseph to start off World War I. So you hadn't heard of anything like, you know, Serbia for roughly, you know, 65 years or so.
Do you remember like hearing about it or like?
Oh yeah, it was on the news all the time. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of confused as to what was really going on.
And then in 1991, which was a little bit after that, there was the Anita Hill hearing.
Clarence Thomas had been nominated for the Supreme Court by George H.W. Bush at that point in time, and he had been vetted. I guess, you know, they vet who they're gonna put on the bench, and Joe Biden is actually, I think, the head Democrat that was, in charge of the confirmation hearings, if I recall.
Yeah.
And then several days into it,
Oh, did you watch the hearings?
I watched them, yeah, because I was in college at the time, and so we were watching stuff on it. I mean, I didn't watch it religiously, but for the most part, I was reading the news. I always read the newspaper. I'm not a big TV person, I like the newspaper. And I guess maybe a week into the confirmation hearings or so, there was a question about an Anita Hill who had worked for Clarence Thomas in his previous judgeship, and that there was a relationship between them that was perhaps an inappropriate relationship. And Anita Hill had claimed that she had been coerced with in different ways to have I believe, a sexual relationship with him, which he of course denied.
Yeah.
I believe he was married at the time. The FBI did investigate, and they came back with no evidence that it happened, which is not really unusual. I mean, you had like a he said, she said sort of situation where it could have been construed in either way. But yeah, I mean that's what kind of happened with the Clarence Thomas confirmation.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Alter. Yes. Okay.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Here we have Mr. Alter. Okay. During the Challenger explosion during 1986.
Yeah.
How old were you?
That was 17. I was 17. That was the year that I was graduating high school.
Oh, wait. So you were at school when it happened?
I was still. My memory. If you tell me the date, I'll know. But I remember that it was before I went to college because I was in the kitchen with my mother, so I couldn't have been in college yet unless I had come back. But I'm assuming it was before
January
June.
28th, 1986.
Yeah. So right. So it was certainly during my senior year of high school. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Do you remember how you felt?
Yeah, my memory of that's interesting because I was in the kitchen, and we had a little TV in the kitchen, and my mother was watching this, and then she just started crying. Right? It really affected my mother. She was very emotional about it,
Yeah.
and so that affected me. My memory of it is more of my mother's reaction that this person had lost her life, and she was a teacher. This was obviously before I was even thinking about becoming a teacher. I hadn't even considered the idea, but yeah, that's my memory of it. Was my mother's reaction to how tragic it was made me. I probably would have felt whatever I would have felt anyway, but I it was more pronounced by the way my mother reacted.
Oh, your mother's reaction,
Yeah.
That
So
makes
I've
sense.
always remembered that. Anytime it comes up, I always think about my mother's reaction and how it made me realize how sad it was. Nobody expected that. I mean, this was supposed to be a big moment, right? You were getting an everyday person, a civilian, was getting a chance to go into space, and then they die like immediately. It was like, blast off and dead. That was really hard to watch. Yeah.
You actually cover everything. Do you think it affected any public opinion on NASA or
Could have. It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't know exactly how that played out, but obviously we're still trying to make that kind of space travel. A public. Well, even a public. They're trying to get the public to be able to go up in space. And make that a regular thing, like the Disney World. So I don't know how much it's really, whether it's slowed down that idea at all. But
how about the Bush-Gore presidential election?
yeah. So when was that? 2000? What was that?
2000. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was just upsetting because it seemed like at the time the Supreme Court kind of weighed in politically,
Right.
and that a lot of people did feel that the election was given to Bush, and it meant a lot because within a few years we had 9/11, and we were in Iraq, and that decision mattered. So when you think about the craziness that's going on now, right, with what happened in the January 6th situation
Yeah.
and questioning the election, and back then that was a moment where people were really wondering about the way our government functions.
Right.
Yeah, so that was a lot.
Do you think it hurt? You were old enough to vote, so how'd you feel about the manual recounts ordered by?
It's hard to remember.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to remember, this whole thing with the Chads and were they hanging or did they?
Pregnant Chads.
Right. Did what counted? I just remember feeling like I think a lot of people felt that we just want this done right.
Yeah.
You just want to get to an answer. You don't want a political solution to this, and I think a lot of people felt that there was a political solution to it, as opposed to just having impartial people make the right decision. That was the problem.
That was biased.
Yeah, that's. But look, I mean.
Yeah.
I can say I want Gore to win, so I don't know if that matters.
Do you think it changed your perspective on like the voting ballots themselves, or like how they work?
It's hard to say. I mean, because it was the kind of thing like now where it's different all across the country.
Right.
It's a decentralized system, so it's hard to say what I thought at the time.
Okay, that's like it.
Yeah. So it's hard to remember though.
Do you remember the Bosnia ethnic cleansing?
Yeah, as I was saying, I've taught about it a lot, so it's hard to remember what I thought at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to
what you've taught about
when I was teaching. I mean, at the time, this idea when the ethnic cleansing idea came out, that seemed really horrific, and it was hard to understand how in Europe itself that you could have a situation where they were openly targeting Muslim men, say in Bosnia and whatnot, and that at the time it seemed that situations like this shouldn't be happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have like a personal connection to it?
No, but Clinton got involved in it. I mean, we started bombing. It was very confusing at the time. Where are we? What's our position? And eventually you had some of those leaders, the Serbian leaders, who were arrested. I think Milosevic, right? They were brought up on war crimes, and that played out in some strange way. I forget what happened to him. He died in prison. I forget what happened to him exactly, but it was. But also when you teach about Rwanda, it's a similar time, and kind of all this focus on what happened in Bosnia as a Eurocentric focus, and then what's going on in Rwanda, like whatever.
Right.
So there was this underlying question of sort of the racist aspect of the way the UN or the international community responds to tragedies like that, and that in the only response in Rwanda was to pull out people, their own citizens, not necessarily go in and try to help people, whereas there was all this concern because it was Europe, it was in Europe. So there was that.
Right. Okay. Last one. Do you remember the NBA Hunter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was Clarence Thomas. I mean, Clarence Thomas, when was that?
1991?
91. Okay, so that's right after college for me.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it kind of had this component that it was embarrassing that our country, it was embarrassing to.
Clarence Thomas?
Well, because there was this whole thing about this pubic hair on a Coke can. Do you know this story about this? And she seemed very credible in what she was bringing out, but they were trying to discredit her.
Right.
And Clarence Thomas is saying, this didn't happen at all. And then, so there was a lot of feeling that, he shouldn't, just because of this, that should be enough to keep him off of the most important position as a judge in the country. But he was confirmed anyway.
Yeah.
I also felt that it was, at the time, it seemed like a circus. It was hard to really know what the truth was, where the political motivation was. But I always felt that Anita Hill seemed credible.
Yeah. Did you watch the hearings?
I watched some of it, or I got what I got out of the news at the time. Back then the news cycle was very different. Right? You didn't just get on your phone and see
Yeah,
a million
you had to
images.
wait for it.
Yeah, you would watch the news or read about it.
Yeah.
That was it. There was no 24/7 in your face, real time explanations. But you could. I did watch some of it because I remember some of her testimony, but it could have been on the news that I watched it. But it was embarrassing mostly, I thought.
Yeah. Do you think it's changed any views on like race or gender or sexual assault?
I don't know if it changed any views.
Yeah. Or like either in media or in real life.
It's hard to say. I mean, when you think about the Me Too movement and how that's so much later,
Right.
that so what is that a stepping stone? Is it a something in that direction, or is it part of the various straws that break the camel's back?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to say, but it was certainly a very high profile example of a person who was in positions of power, maybe abusing that power. And later on, when you have someone like Mario Cuomo, he ends up losing, having to step down as governor because of some of the ways that but Clarence Thomas got confirmed. Would Clarence Thomas have gotten confirmed with those kind of finger pointing? Now, it's hard to say. What's the justice that just did in a way where there was saying that he had there was a woman who accused him of raping her, I think in high school. I forget. I'm blanking on the judge, the justice. What's his name? Brett. It's not coming to me.
It's okay.
Anyway, so it's hard to say.
Yeah. Right.
There's just so many factors in that question, and so I don't know. But at the time, it was it didn't make the country look good. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Good.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, Mr. Dudney. It's a pleasure to be interviewing you today. First, I would like to ask you where you're from and what your background is.
I'm from Canada.
So, about the Challenger explosion, about how old were you when this happened?
Well, let's see. Let's do a little math. I was 19 years old.
You were 19 years old. And what did 19-year-old Mr. Dudney think when you heard about this news?
Well, I can remember specifically I was skiing.
You were skiing.
And it was during a class trip.
Oh.
And the news spread through, I don't know who found it first, but everyone said, "Did you hear this?" And then that's how I found out. And it was quite shocking. It was one of those things that you remember where you were and what you were doing when you first heard about it. Because there was such a buildup. There was a school teacher. I believe her name was Kristen McAuliffe, or I might have the name.
That is correct, Dad.
Yes.
Mr. Dudney.
There was a school teacher who had been built up about being one of the one of the astronauts on board. So there was a big public. It was in the news a lot. So and everybody was watching to see what was happening when this school teacher was going to lift off on the space shuttle.
Mr. Nolan Dudney, what do you think, in your eyes, as someone who was a student in Canada, how did the public opinion of, the U.S. change, or this, NASA and all of this stuff change from this tragedy?
Well, I think that everyone was sympathetic to the tragedy, and everyone felt a great sense of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And there had been so many successful. I do remember watching the very first shuttle. I think it was in. I'm gonna say 1979.
I'm gonna say you're right because I don't know either.
I think it was 1979, but I could be wrong. But they were becoming somewhat anticlimactic, and that's why they were now having a school teacher, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody felt that it would be safe. So it was a shock, I guess, was the biggest feeling that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it was unbelievable that happened.
But are you aware of the Columbia disaster in 2003?
Oh, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe how that might be related to the Challenger explosion in terms of how it changed public view on this topic?
Well, certainly after that, the 2003 tragedy, NASA, I don't believe that they put any more men, or I'm trying to recall, but there was a very large, you know, backlash.
Right.
And put, you know, NASA was basically putting manned spaceflight into the background rather than the forefront.
Yeah.
And so, whereas that didn't, I don't, at least from my perception from 1986, it was more of a pause than a let's stop doing this for now type of thing. It was there seemed to be a perception that they would be resuming manned flight.
There was like this build up almost that, you know, included the challengers, but it didn't, you know, that was not the focal point. It was just an inclusion.
I think there was more of also in 2003, obviously I had been living in the United States for 10 years, so
Right. So yeah, you have a
perspective
different perspective.
was different. And 10 years, yeah, I lived there for, yeah, and this was many years past the Challenger. So, but then there was a, you know, I think at that point public were saying, is this really worth it? Right. Rather than, but I didn't, at least from my own experience, I didn't take away that message from the 1986 tragedy.
Okay, interesting. Thank you so
That's
much,
my
Mr.
own
Dewey.
perspective.
Well, that's all I'm asking for. Next, I'd like to ask you about the Bush and Gore, Al Gore and Mr. Bush, that presidential election in 2000. So, you were living in America, correct?
Correct.
Where in America were you living?
Specifically at that time,
Yep.
I was living in San Jose, California.
San Jose, California. And, you know, many different areas have many different people, and many different people have many different political views. Did you kind of align with the political views in your area, or no?
I would say that my political views were evolving at that point.
Cool.
I was working for a large pharmaceutical company.
Like Pokemon.
So, you know, at that point I was, I do remember that was the first time I voted Republican because I was, you know, worried about my career and I felt that Bush was going to be more favorable to the pharmaceutical industry for sure. So that swayed
your vote.
vote.
Yeah. And how did you feel when the actual voting was happening and they were doing recounts and there was
Well,
all
it
this
was a
hubbub?
roller coaster ride because the one thing I do remember is the first, like it was very shortly into the evening and it was already declared that Al Gore had won. I do remember that very clearly. And then.
And how did you feel at that moment?
Well, I was disappointed, but
Right.
I wasn't like at that point. I wasn't. It was like, well, you know what.
Yeah. It was quite the eventful election, and honestly, the recount in Florida was the biggest.
Yes. Oh, yes. So I remember.
part of
You know what I also remember?
What?
537 hanging Chad.
Would
Because
like
you
to
don't
explain
remember
that,
but there were punch cards that were used to vote, and so they went and had to count every single vote.
Hanging.
And then there were some that were not punched all the way through, but were flapping. You know?
Yeah.
So
Dimple,
there were,
butterfly.
I believe, 537 of them. And then the Supreme Court was made this decision that these would not be counted, I believe, which then gave the election to Bush.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Dudney. Now I'm asking you about our last topic, which is a very cheerful one: the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia during the time period 1992 to 1995. But from what I understand, it kind of went past that as well to as late as 1998.
I think so. Yes, I
Yeah.
think NATO became involved,
Mm-hmm.
and they basically put an end to the war.
Yeah. How did you first hear about it?
Just through the regular 6:30 news type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was how we got most of our news.
Right.
And maybe a little bit on the radio, driving in my car to work. Those were my main news sources.
And did you have anyone at the time who you knew that had any relation to this event at all?
Well, years later,
I
I came to know. I worked with a gentleman who was a refugee and had lost all of his family in the war.
Prior to meeting that gentleman, how much about the war did you know versus how much you
Well,
knew
I
after?
knew of the atrocities. I mean, we
Mhm.
heard about, but it seemed, I think it was sort of, at least my perception was that it was a war that kind of went under the radar, in that there was, it was something happening far away and just on the news.
Right. And do you remember first hearing about the massacre?
Trying to remember. I mean, I'm not sure that I can remember. I believe that was happening in the mid 90s. I mean, ethnic cleansing is what you're talking
Yes.
about. Yes. That's basically, I think, what happened to my friend's family. And he was able to escape. He went to Germany.
Hi, I'm Dan Schuckett.
History. Okay.
History teacher at Edwin.
Okay. Do you remember the challenge?
Very, very well. It was my first year teaching, and we were watching it in school. So that was as a lot of kids were watching it in school. So that was a tough one. There wasn't really much to, it was shocking for everyone.
Wait, how old were you when it happened?
I was 22, 23.
Okay.
Yeah, I was teaching. That was my first year teaching. So I was teaching 7th, 8th, and 9th graders, and we were all watching the Challenger launch because they were putting a teacher up in space. So that was something that was tough. That was a rough moment.
Do you think it had like an impact on your life?
No, not really. I mean, it was maybe for a week or so. It was, well, because we watched it with kids. I was in the room with kids, and we had to sort of process it together.
How old were you during the election? Like, were you old enough to vote?
Yeah, I was old enough to vote.
If you were old enough to vote, who did you vote for and why? You don't have to answer that.
No, it's okay. I voted for Gore. I was never a big fan of Governor Bush's or his dad's. So, and I'd already, seen the direction that the country had gone under Reagan, so we didn't need that.
How'd you feel about the manual recounts that Florida?
like the election was stolen.
Yeah.
That didn't really understand why it would have been a problem not to finish the recount. We could have finished the recount, figured out who actually won the election, but that's up to the history books now.
Do you think it changed your perspective on like voting ballots and how they worked, or how they
Well, after that election, there was a lot of talk about changing the Electoral College and having a constitutional amendment to get rid of it, and it was really on everyone's mind, and it was the sort of the water cooler conversation for the better part of a year, and then 9/11 happened, and we haven't talked about it since. So yeah.
Do you remember the Bosnia ethnic cleansing?
Sure, but not as, again, that didn't really impact.
You.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was aware that it was happening, but didn't pay too close attention to it.
Okay. Do you remember the
Anita Hill trials? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it was as if she was on trial.
Yeah, almost.
It was the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
Yep.
How old do you remember?
Tell me the year.
1991.
I was 28.
Oh, okay. Do you think it personally affected you or anyone you knew around you?
No, but it was, again, sexual harassment at the workplace was a hot topic of conversation, and definitely did get people talking about those things.
Do you remember seeing anything about like race, gender, or sexual assault change in real life or media?
Because of that?
Yeah.
Again, just the conversation, people I think it raised awareness, but I don't know that things didn't change then. That's gonna come a little later.
Right.
But I guess it was part of it. Yeah, that you could look at that as a link in the chain to get those things starting. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, so I'm Pam Rains. I am 56 years old and I'm a high school history teacher.
Yes. And the first topic that I wanted to discuss was the Challenger explosion in 1986. And can I ask, how old were you, and do you remember where you were?
So I remember exactly where I was when it happened, and I was in high school. I was a junior in high school in Rockland County, and we were watching it on TV, just like everyone else. Like, there's tons of people in America who were watching. I assume also around the world, because there was a teacher on this trip, and the idea was that this was the first time that they were having a teacher, and everyone was saying, "Wow, it's a civilian, it's not an astronaut." So all the classes were watching. So it was a beautiful day, and you can see the backdrop, but they keep on panning to the audience. So you see the shuttle, and then you have the audience sitting there, and some of her students were there, and then they pan to her classroom, where has all her students there, and her parents, and all this, and then all of a sudden it goes up, and everyone's cheering, and our class is cheering, and my teacher said, "This is history, you're watching history." And as soon as you see it go up, and then all of a sudden, boom, the mass explosion, and you can sort of hear it, but you can see it. Like, I could still actively see the exact scene, and all of a sudden everyone's hearts just dropped. It's like, that can't be. Because everyone thought there was going to be a problem. It'd be on the takeoff. That something would go wrong, or maybe the takeoff wouldn't happen, but the reality was, once they got off the ground, everyone was like, "Man, this is going to be amazing. They're going to do all these things." And then all of a sudden, there was no spatial. It was blown to bits, in the whole outline. What you see is the explosion.
Do you remember what happened after,
Like
how
right
the rest
after.
of how the rest of the school day was?
So the rest just, for us, you mean for us. So, I remember people yelling in the hallway, going, "Did you just see that? Did you?" So you knew what they were talking about, even though people may have not said, "Hey, were you watching the Challenger?" It was people saying, "Did you see what just happened?" And it wasn't the sense of, "Ooh, let's gossip about what it was." It was, "Oh my goodness, this is a historic tragedy that you have this amazing event happening, and look how from victory to tragedy, like before all of our eyes." So I remember teachers talking about it. I remember other students, like we just talking and going, "I can't believe that happened. How'd that happen?" And then a lot of people started saying, "What happened? Was it a pilot error? Was somebody on the space shuttle? Was it a equipment error?" Which is what it turned out to be with the tiles. But people are saying, "Oh wait, what?" There was a lot of questions being asked right after the initial shock of this just happened. I think there were people even that day. I remember going home, and I have two older brothers, and us talking about it and saying, "How did this happen?" And then as the days wore on, and as you get more information, it became, "Wow, are they ever going to do another space shuttle? Will they continue a program?" And then all the things that all the tributes to all the astronauts, but specifically, like if you ask me the name of the other astronauts, I can tell you, I can see their faces. I can't tell you all their names, but I can tell you Chrissy McCullough, like off the top without any question. But it was bigger than just her. It was all these other people who died as well.
For the Christine McAuliffe, she was a teacher and it was the Teacher in Space program. Was there like a lot of publicity around the event, around the space shuttle going because of the Teacher in Space program?
Yeah, I definitely was, because before that, there had been very successful shuttle launches. I don't know how many, but it wasn't. This one was not seen as a trial and error. This was it's a space shuttle, but because she was on it, that made it, that particular shuttle became more famous. So yeah, I think definitely the teacher program definitely made it, but not leading up to it, only the few weeks or few months before, all of a sudden, Chrissy McCullough, this is what she's doing. She's not an astronaut, she's a teacher. All these other things that started coming up in people's minds that was not necessarily seen before that. But as a woman, even though there have been women like Sally Ride or other women, that she was still one of these pioneers for not just teachers, but also for women doing other things.
Yeah, it's a very tragic topic.
Yeah.
And I have a quote from a witness, or like a restaurant hostess, and she was watching the event at the restaurant.
Yeah.
And she said people were coming in off the streets just to watch what was happening. We didn't even try to work. The place just stopped. Everybody's silent, just watching the TV. And
I would say that's exactly what happened. But remember, I was 16 or 17 years old, so kids start saying, "Hey, what happened?" I think people were like shocked. It's just for you, well, you're not old enough, but you've seen many more images of 9/11. That people were just shocked, and people just stopped, and it became one country. No matter what your politics were, it was a national tragedy, and people all came together to see what was happening. So that's a perfect quote.
you talked about how the students at your school were talking about this event a lot. Was there any discussions from the school itself or like the teachers?
You mean like that's in class, like just discuss what
Any
happened?
kind of assembly or something like that.
My teacher did. The next day, my science teacher talked about it. But we didn't have an assembly. It was really up to the teacher to decide if they wanted to. I would think that almost every teacher probably mentioned it, but my entire class, the period of class, was talking about it. And talking about what could have happened and what did happen and now what does NASA do and does this impact, and we were talking more than just the actual shuttle. We were talking about the NASA program. What happens to the shuttle program? Should it be put on pause because this was an accident? Or at that point, I don't even remember the day after, we didn't know exactly. It took time for them to figure out what the actual cause was. I don't remember them finding out right away. I'm gonna have to go back and look. But I don't know if you know from your reports, like how long it took them to really realize that it was one of the tiles.
Yeah, I don't have exactly when it was down, but I do know that it was like the O-rings and something about it broke because of the cold temperatures.
Right.
And they should have stopped it, but they didn't because I'm guessing a lot of the publicity.
Right. The fact of that happens in some other cases, that you don't want to stop something even though it may be crossing that threshold of danger, but you don't want to stop it because the public, the media.
Do you think it was like there was a fear that if they pushed it back, there would be less publicity and less?
I think there would have been backlash at the moment. People said, "Oh, why are you not running it?" But I think the people would have said, "Okay, we're taking safety first." But I don't necessarily know if they thought that this was what was going to happen. They would have never said no if they really thought that was what was going to happen. But did they? Should have they stopped it? I don't know. Hindsight's really easy. It's really easy for us to say, well, they should have, they could have, because I don't know what actually really was happening at that moment. I've heard a lot of stories about, yes, they should have stopped it. Yes, they knew this was going on. Then I've also heard stories that it was something they thought was not going to impact the flight. So, I don't know. It's really easy for us to say. I mean, I wish they stopped it,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
So like we could talk like a little bit, like a couple minutes.
Sure.
About the Clarence Thomas and
Sure.
Hill hearings.
So you'll have to tell me the year, because I can remember
Okay.
the hearings, I just can't tell you the year.
Right. It was in 1991, and
So it's a college. Okay.
so do you remember how old you were exactly?
Yeah, so I was 21. I was a senior in college, and I can remember Anita Hill sitting before the hearing and talking about Clarence Thomas. Then I remember Clarence Thomas speaking and his wife sitting right behind him. Those are two very vivid memories that I have of that whole event.
So you were watching it live on TV?
Yeah. I was a poli-sci major in college.
Oh.
So part of the things were watching all these things, whether it was Clarence Thomas or whatever was going on. The idea was to keep up on whatever news you could have, like ABC or one of the broadcasts had it going.
So did you discuss it in your classes?
That I don't remember, but I do remember speaking with friends about it, and I remember that we were talking about, it was either a junior or senior, like it was in that time period of college, and I remember talking to other people saying, wow, I can't believe this is happening, this is something you never thought would happen, because it became very personal attacks on, the hearings got very divisive. You guys did you watch any of them?
No.
So you could watch them. I mean, they had them, and you could see that she made some comments that she believed that Clarence Thomas did things that he should not be Supreme Court justice. And then Clarence Thomas defended himself, and there was some things that were just brought up in the whole conversations. And that Anita Hill was working at either UNC or North Carolina State or something, and she was a law professor, I believe, at the time.
It was a professor at Oklahoma.
Oh, she was at Oklahoma. Okay. So, but she had known him previously.
Right.
So it was this whole thing that she spoke really well, really strong about what her point of view was, and Clarence Thomas spoke his view. And it's interesting now, looking so many years later, that he's still on the Supreme Court, and that I don't even know what. I mean, I've seen interviews with her periodically, but I couldn't tell you exactly what she's doing now. I mean, I'm assuming she's still a professor or practicing law. I don't know. Yeah, but that was also one of those things that caught me by surprise. How I've never really watched those kind of hearings, but now I watch some of the hearings today, and it's just very different, because even just the cameras, where things are, and I don't know, it just comes across very differently than back then.
Yeah. And you said that you were talking about it with some of your friends. Do you remember like what the kind of general opinion was on it, or like how people sided with?
People were trying to be as impartial as possible, but I think more of the people that I was talking to were agreeing with Anita Hill and thought that Clarence Thomas should not. Yeah, those are the people that I was talking to. I'm not going to tell you what I thought, but the people she was very credible, and that she put up points that should have paused his ability to become a Supreme Court justice.
Yeah. When I was doing some research, I saw that in the moment when the hearings were happening, a lot of people were on Clarence Thomas's side.
Absolutely.
And then afterwards, it kind of changed more towards her side.
But I think when people heard him speak, he's very well spoken, presented his case. I think people were like, okay. Whether you agree with him politically, it was more like, okay, whatever. Once she spoke, I think people started saying, oh, not sure, maybe. I think she brought up a lot of question marks for people. But that happens in a lot of these hearings, depending on who you believe and who you side with in a lot of these cases. So yeah, it was definitely another big one.
Hi, this is our reflection video on the oral history project.
We kind of had a pretty, good run with it all. With picking candidates especially, we kind of just social studies teachers, my dad,
History
teachers,
old people
who were alive, who were Americans who were alive at the time. So yeah, that was, probably like the easiest part of it all. We kind of made the list really quickly, made it during class as the entire project was being announced. So yeah.
Next, we were researching and researching the topics and creating questions for the topics. So
I did some research on the Challenger explosion and on the Anita Hill trials.
Yeah,
Hearings. The hearings. And
trials.
I used the Search for Success thing on the library website.
Yes. I also use Search for Success, or I use ProQuest mainly for research.
Yeah, I made some of the questions, and I was mostly thinking about the context of their lives while the events were occurring, and I guess some opinions on the topics, and also the societal opinions on the topics.
Yeah, mostly focusing on their personal experiences, and then Jean came up with the basis of where were you, how old were you, what were you doing, and then going to specific questions about each topic, how did it affect you or the people around you, or did you see any effects of it? Yes.
In terms of interviewing, for me, interviewing my own father was pretty easy. I just had to kind of ask him and hope that he didn't talk too much. It was a little funny when I accidentally said the wrong year and then he corrected me. I was not expecting that, but he did that. He has a really good memory and he's, very talkative, but he talks kind of slow, so I was kind of like, hey, yeah,
20-minute clip.
20-minute clip. And yeah, I think the only thing wrong with that interview is that I had to pause and there's awkward cuts because there were times where we got off topic or something happened in the background. So
I think our interview with Shukit was moderately well. So we sat with him after school and we tried to ask him thought-provoking questions we had. I think one thing we could have done better is to maybe go to a more secluded environment because there were a lot of distractions in the environment of which we were filming. For example, there's a lot of background noise, there was someone on the phone, there was just a lot of external distractions that probably could have been eliminated or reduced, which would therefore increase our productivity.
Yeah, and then Shukit was probably our smallest and shortest interview. It was about 8 minutes because he just didn't have a lot of things to say about the topics. But in contrast to that, we had Mr. Alter, who we consider our best interview because it was exactly 10 minutes and we covered all the topics evenly.
I interviewed Pam, and I think some issues that I had with the interview was that I kind of didn't know how to start the interview, so Pam kind of introduced herself to start it off, and we were also recording it in the entrance of the A school, so there were like doors swinging open, so you might hear that in the video. But I think what did go well was that Pam had some really clear memories about what we talked about, so it was really interesting to listen to, and I ended up asking questions that I didn't write down on the planned interview questions. Yeah.
And then Mr. Scally was also a really good candidate to interview because he remembered little details about everything, and he gave us a lot of
Material
to work with. Yeah. When I was compiling the video and editing it, I didn't have enough storage on my regular devices, so I had to use like another external device of my family's, and for some reason I couldn't use like a regular editing app, so I had to use like Adobe Premiere Pro for some reason because the videos were so long, and it was like an hour's worth of like footage. So I had to like download Adobe, and then I mean I had the Adobe account, but I had to, so it was a process, and then I edited them in Adobe Premiere Pro, which wasn't that hard. I just cut out unnecessary footage.
Though this project had a lot of challenges, I think that there were definitely some highlights that we should point out. For example, we have very strong team harmony. There was a lot of equal division of work, but most importantly, we all got along well. Even outside of the classroom, we are all very close friends, and we were very efficient together, and we worked really well, and there was no inequality or one person taking responsibility for the entirety of the work, and it was very like civil, and I think that was something to be highlighted.
Yeah.
But the challenges, we all had different things that we were doing over spring break, and we probably should have done more before spring break, but we didn't do that, and during spring break it was just so hard to meet up that all of our videos and stuff were really like separate. Like there's a lot that are done in school, and then mine's just by myself in my house with my dad.
Yeah.
So the continuity is, you know,
Choppy.
non-existent. It's pretty choppy, and you know, if I could do it over again, I would bring my dad to the school. No, I'm kidding. But like, I would do something different, so it doesn't look like it's just a random clip that's just in there. I do something to make it seem more like I don't know, like maybe I'd bring Kayden with me and he'd be in the interview with me, so or something. I don't know, something like that. Or if I had more time, I'd be in other interviews too. But unfortunately, that was the only one I could be in. So yeah. I wish I could have changed that.
And then me and Jean had a little trouble asking Mr. Alter to interview. It was like because we asked him before spring break, and then it happened to be after spring break, so a very big time gap.
Yeah, what happened was, I think a couple of days before spring break, we asked him, so it was kind of last minute.
Inefficient?
Yeah, and we planned to interview him on Friday, but there was a mix-up with the location, so we couldn't find him to interview him, so we ended up interviewing him after break.
Yeah, so it was a little, the scheduling was a little messy, but we still got everything done on time.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thanks for watching.